What is your name?
Don Abrams,
Where were you born?
July 1933,
Okay. Where were you born?
Oak Park, Illinois.
Did you have any siblings?
No,
Did you speak any language other than English at home?
no.
What type of school did you attend?
What type of school?
Mm-hmm.
Public school.
Okay. What were the names of your parents?
Henrietta and Louis Abrams.
What did your parents do for a living before the Depression?
My father had a photographic studio before the Depression. And my mother, I believe she may have worked at Marshall Fields. I'm not sure. But she was quite young then.
Did your family belong to a synagogue?
No, they didn't. My grandparents, my father's parents, belonged to a synagogue. I don't believe that my mother's parents did, and we did not.
Did most people at the time belong to synagogue? Was that unique that you didn't?
I really don't know, because we lived in a very Gentile area, and if my aunts and uncles went to a synagogue, I'm not aware of it. I don't know if they did or didn't. I would guess probably most of them didn't.
How was the Jewish atmosphere in your house?
Jewish atmosphere in the house was primarily one of what my mother would cook. We didn't say prayers in the house. My grandfather davened every day, and his father was a cantor in Chicago. But in our house, we didn't do anything.
Was that Nehemiah?
Yes,
Your grandfather?
my great-grandfather.
Your he was a cantor.
Right,
Because I saw a picture over there. He seemed to be wearing a cantorial hat.
right.
Could you tell us a little bit about him, where he came from?
I don't think I've ever met him. So I really don't have any history.
What about your grandfather?
What is your question? Where he came from?
Did you know your grandfather?
Yes.
Can you tell us where he grew up and what kind of person
I
he
think
was?
when they came to the United States, which was probably in the late 1800s, they came through Canada, and I know that my father lived in Green Bay, Wisconsin for a while. Then they moved to Forest Park, Illinois, and my grandfather then had a delicatessen in Forest Park. And I remember stories, if not, it could be that I was there, but the stories I know for sure is if a Jewish person would come in and they wanted to buy some ham, he wouldn't sell it to them. So that was the extent of my Jewish upbringing.
Did you have any formal Jewish education?
No. I went to Hebrew school for a very short time, and being in this Gentile neighborhood, I was very uncomfortable being Jewish. I didn't want to be seen carrying Hebrew books with me, and I dropped out of Hebrew school.
Did your grandparents live near you?
Not very near.
What were their names?
Theodore Abrams and Lena Abrams. And they came, I believe, from Lithuania.
Were they very religious Jews?
My grandmother, I'm sure, kept a kosher house, but my grandfather was very religious, and he would daven every day.
Do you have any specific memories about them?
One memory I have is that in their kitchen, they had a light fixture in the ceiling, and you turned it on and off by pulling a string. And they didn't like me pulling the string, so I remember them telling me that every time that I pulled it, it cost them a nickel. So,
What was Shabbat like in your parents' house?
like any other day.
On Passover, did you eat any matzah?
Not that I remember.
Are there any specific Jewish memories that you have when you were growing up? Maybe like a bar mitzvah or a wedding?
I never went to any bar mitzvahs while we lived in Chicago. Or I'm not sure if I went to any weddings or not. But when we moved to Milwaukee, I can't remember when I went to my first bar mitzvah, but that would have been in Milwaukee.
Did you have a bar mitzvah?
No. So I have no Jewish upbringing at all. And the first time that I went to holiday services was when I was going to school in Arizona. I went to one of the synagogues there. There I did become more involved with Judaism. I went to Hillel, took out a number of Jewish girls. And when I was in the Army, I went to services then. And an advantage of being Jewish in the Army was that not only did you get off for the Jewish holidays, but you got off for the Gentile holidays. So that was a plus.
Is there a main memory that stands out from your childhood?
Not really.
What is the happiest occasion that you can remember?
I'm sure when I got my first camera, that was a happy occasion for me.
When was that?
When was that? Well, I was maybe 15 years old. Well, I had camera before, but first decent camera that I had, I was about 15. That was a big event in my life.
Were there any certain things that you maybe wanted, such as toys, that you couldn't have during the Depression?
I wanted an electric train, and I didn't have that. But I had a cousin who had an electric train, and that was an exciting thing to go to their house and play with the train.
Did you have any food rations?
We had food stamps. You needed stamps, tokens to buy different foods in the store.
Can you tell us a little bit what it was like growing up during the Depression? Or if you remember the difference between before and what changed during the Depression?
I can't remember before because the Depression didn't start till 29 and I was born in 33.
That makes sense.
I know that my parents maintained a decent standard of living, not maybe decent by our standards today, but they had an apartment in a reasonable building. They bought groceries because some people were making very, very little money, if at all. At least my father had a job at that time.
If there was one place or thing that you could relive or revisit, where or what would it be?
Nothing specific comes to mind.
Were you involved in any religious or other Jewish cultural activities growing up?
No. These are hard questions for you because you're getting yes and no answers.
Did you ever put on tefillin or any other religious items growing up?
No, not at all.
When was the first time you encountered a pair of tefillin?
My grandfather had tefillin, my father's father. And he would read the foreword. I assume that was a Yiddish foreword. I don't know if they've made a Hebrew one or not, but he would always be sitting in his chair reading the foreword. And he would daven daily. My grandfather had an interesting occupation along the way. I'd mentioned that he had a delicatessen, but later on, he was an egg candler. And an egg candler is somebody who would take an egg and hold it up to a light to make sure there was no blood in it. So that was certainly different than, I don't believe we see that today. Not manually, anyway.
Did your grandfather's Jewish involvement or Jewish, religious commitment affect you at all, or did he try to teach, did he talk to you about Judaism or?
About the only thing he did, I can remember going to visit him in a they called it a Jewish center. It wasn't really a synagogue, but a Jewish center in Oak Park. And we went to visit him during the holidays. Maybe only one time, but I remember that one time. What was the rest of the question?
Did he try to teach you at all?
Oh,
or
okay.
you-
Here's what came to mind. The extent of his trying to teach me, other than what he may have told my father to do, which I have no idea if he did at all, is that when I was 13 years old, he gave me a Bible, which I still have. But that was the extent of it.
Are there any childhood or teenage experiences that you'd like to share?
An adventure was going to school in Arizona. That was a highlight in my younger days, to see the different landscape. Yeah,
Is it college? You went to college?
college
in
at the University of Arizona.
What were some of the favorite things that you liked to photograph when you were growing up?
I was pretty much into generalizing. In Arizona, I would take some of the cactus blooms. I would take pictures of the architecture, pictures of other students.
When did you first start to like photography?
Oh, it was maybe when I was 11, 12 years old.
What was your first camera like?
It was called a Baby Brownie. Cost $3.16, and it was made by Eastman Kodak. And I have a replica of that now. I found one in they call it an antique store. It was probably a junk store. But I found one, and I have that in my collection of old cameras.
What about your father? How did his photography affect his job? Did he
That was his job, was photography.
have to change anything about him because of the anti-Semitism?
He used his first name as a last name because he felt that would be advantageous for him in his business. He did a lot of portrait work of affluent people, and it was his opinion that this was helpful not to have a Jewish name.
What was his original name?
Lewis. Lewis was his first name, and he changed it to his last name,
So what did he call himself?
Mr. Lewis, as far as I can remember.
Did he do photography when you came here to Milwaukee?
Yes, absolutely. He had a studio in the Schrader Hotel, and that later moved to West Wisconsin Avenue across from Marquette University. He was there until he retired. So that was his whole career. I think he started out as an apprentice in Chicago, and he ended up owning a studio in Milwaukee. He would tell me how he and another, or maybe several other apprentices would go to the Art Institute in Chicago to study how the paintings were composed, their compositions, and he was always into this.
Did your first camera, was it very similar to his camera? Did it have film? Did it have
Well, they all had film then.
I don't know that.
And it certainly wasn't similar. It was very unsimilar,
Oh.
very unsophisticated.
Was his camera very sophisticated for the time?
Well, at the time, he had a small camera that he carried with him for his own pleasure. But as far as the sophistication for the camera that he used for portraiture, it didn't have to be that sophisticated because there wasn't that much that you could do with it. You're just taking portraits. Although he did have more sophisticated cameras as the years went by because he did a lot of wedding photography. And you couldn't use one of these great big view cameras for that.
Can we go back to your mother? You mentioned that your mother would cook. Can you talk about a little bit about your mother, where she came from, what her Jewish background was, and some of the ways things she would cook to celebrate holidays?
Her background, I don't think, was much greater than mine, except that she lived in an area that they weren't all Gentiles, and I'm sure they had a lot of Jewish friends and a lot of Jewish relatives.
Did she come from more of an observant home?
Not really. Not really. They would have holiday dinners, because I can remember that. I don't know if it's for Passover or what the occasion was, but I remember going to my grandparents' apartment. That was her parents. And having holiday dinners there.
What sort of foods would she, Jewish, foods would she cook, or holiday foods?
I remember she made simchas. And whether we had matzah or not, you asked about matzah before. I don't know if we had any. I don't remember any matzah in the house.
Matzah may have been hard to get a hold of during the Depression years.
Could be.
Was there any other Jewish atmosphere in the house in terms of, culture or food or?
Not really. No, it was,
Did your mom light Shabbat candles?
no. No, there was very little overt religion in the house.
What about your grandmother? We heard about your grandfather. Was your grandmother around?
She was in the kitchen baking. And she would make bread. I don't know if she made it once a week or how often she made it, but I can remember her making bread. Presumably challah, but I don't know for sure.
Were they American, your grandparents?
They were born in Lithuania. That was my father's parents, and my mother's parents came from Russia.
Did you know them?
Yes.
Were they more observant?
I don't remember seeing anything particularly Jewish in the house, other than that my grandfather did have a lot of books. And I don't know if they were in Hebrew or in Yiddish, but he had those in the house.
Did anyone at home speak Yiddish?
My mother picked up a lot of it, but I guess from her grandmother and her mother. But the everyday conversation was in English.
So in college, why did you start to seek out some more Judaism?
Because it gave me a sense of belonging. I was involved with a Jewish fraternity. I frequently went to Hillel. In fact, I still send them a check every year because I feel that they added so much to my development.
Was it important for you to marry a Jewish girl?
It must have been, because I remember not dating any Gentile girls as I got older.
When you lived in this house now, was there any part of your Jewish life that started showing more?
Not that I recall.
Did you ever light did Nana ever light Shabbat candles here?
Yes, she did.
Did you have any Jewish meals here ever, like Shabbat dinner?
I don't know if we'd call it a Shabbat dinner.
When I was asking you earlier, you said that you guys had a sukkah in the back. What was that like for you? Did you ever eat in there?
No.
It was just there.
No, Nana was in charge of the sukkah, and she put it up as much as we put up. Because we had a frame up there all the time. This frame is still there that we used to have an awning on. So we could use that and then just fill it in.
Did you ever give Daddy or Uncle Scott any Jewish education?
Yes, we sent them both to Hebrew school and to Sunday school.
Did you think that was important? Did you think that was an important thing to do?
Yes.
Why is that? Why do you feel it was important if it wasn't something that you had?
I think it was nice to belong to a Jewish organization and practice Judaism.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you did when you got married? What you do for a living?
When I went to school, I majored in insurance, and I got my degree through the School of Business with an insurance major, and shortly thereafter I was drafted into the Army, and when I got out, Then I went back to school for a short time, even though I'd already graduated. I went back for one semester. And then I found a job with an insurance company, and I became an underwriter for this insurance company, and ultimately became the supervisor of the fire insurance department of the company. And at that point, or from that point on, I formed my own insurance agency, and I had the agency until I retired.
Did you do any more Jewish practicing after you retired?
No.
Did you have any Jewish friends in the army?
One or two. There weren't that many there.
Where were you?
I was at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio.
How long were you there for? Or in the Army for?
A couple of years.
Well, what did you do in the army?
Well, they sent me to cooking school because I had a degree in business. So I guess they thought I'd be a good cook. And what happened is when they I was at Fort Hood, Texas, and they transferred me to Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio. Then at that point, they interviewed me there and asked if I wanted to be a cook. This is after they put me through cooking school. And I told them no. And that was the end of my cooking career. And I did mostly clerical work after that.
If you were, how did photography, what was your involvement with photography while you were working in insurance?
I started taking wedding pictures. I'd done that for my father, I think starting later years of high school through college, primarily candid weddings and bar mitzvahs. And once I started my own agency, I certainly continued doing that until it reached a point where I was spending so much time on photography that I had to make a decision. Do I want to be a photographer or do I want to be involved in the insurance business? And I selected insurance, which I think for me was a good decision. And my wife didn't want me to be a photographer because she didn't want me to be involved in a family relationship coupled with business. And in retrospect, she was absolutely right, and it worked out well.
What do you mean a family relationship?
What I mean is that I would be the son, and my father would be the boss, and he would tell me what to do and how to do it, and I didn't need that. So we split up business-wise, certainly not family-wise, and it worked out very well.
What was your involvement with the Bureau or Department of Tourism?
To do photography for them that they would use in their publications to promote tourism in the state.
So they hired you as like a freelance photographer?
Right.
Wow.
And I did that for several other publications too, and some nonprofits. But my primary account was the Department of Tourism.
Sarah, is there anything else you want to add? Is there anything else that you wanted to share while we're...
Do you want to talk about his relationship with Judaism today or anything like that? Or is it more about the...
Sure. What about a message for the youth, to the Jewish youth today? Do you have any, thoughts on the continuity of Jewish youth or the importance of Jewish education?
I think it's important to socialize together. As far as the education, I haven't really given it much thought.
What was it like marrying a girl from an Orthodox home? How did that affect your involvement with Judaism?
It affected me to the point that when we got married, we did keep a Jewish home with lighting of the candles, and it ultimately became a kosher home.
Were you supportive of that?
Yes. Yeah, that was fine with me.
Did you ever want to stop keeping kosher?
No.
And we mentioned before about your children receiving a Jewish education or going to Hebrew school.
Well, we certainly sent them to Hebrew school and to Sunday school. And I was certainly supportive of that. I think the main thrust was through my wife, but I did follow her thoughts on that, and I thought that what we were doing was right and good.
What about your involvement as a photographer with Jewish organizations or causes throughout Milwaukee?
I've taken pictures for a number of nonprofits, among them several synagogues. Always did it on a gratuitous basis.
How did that make you feel?
Made me feel that I was doing the right thing. I never thought about charging for that, and I thought it was a good thing to do the work.
Was charity something you saw in your home or of your father, your grandfather?
No.
Well, I guess it was a time period thing also, I don't know, during the Depression. Okay.
Thank you, Papa.
Thank you.
You're welcome.